Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Crowder's Corner here on LinkedIn. I'm Mike Crowder. Today is September 16th, 2020. Several days ago, I was on Twitter and I read an article about efforts in the city of San Francisco to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. Now, as we all know, the minimum age for voting in most elections is 18. So when I read that article, initially, I was opposed to the idea of allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. And I responded to that Twitter article with my opposition to allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. And the reason why I opposed it at the time is because I remember when I was 16 and 17 years old. I didn't know about politics. I didn't care about politics. I didn't keep up with current events. Didn't know the candidates for any office, local, state, or federal. Didn't keep up with the issues. Didn't keep up with the political parties. But that was 1978 and 1979. Fast forward 40 plus years, a lot has changed. Now, let's go into the historical aspects of how we got to where we are now. In the early 1940s, the federal government started allowing people as young as 18 to be drafted into the military to fight in World War II. In effect, they reduced the age to fight in World War II against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan from 21 to 18. 20 years later, we saw the explosion of the youth movement. College students on campuses across the country becoming more politically active than they'd ever been, at least publicly. And that really surrounded two issues: the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. And of course, we know that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds were drafted and sent to Vietnam to fight in our efforts to prevent the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, from turning South Vietnam into a communist dictatorship, which is what North Vietnam, not North Korea, was at the time. Now, in 1971, Congress passed a constitutional amendment, and enough states ratified it that lowered the voting age in all elections, local, state, and federal, to 18 years old. Now, that's been almost 50 years ago. So fast forward to today, actually 6 or 7 years ago, efforts began primarily in small cities, suburban areas, and some large metropolitan areas to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. And the article I was reading, as I mentioned, on Twitter over the weekend, was about the city of San Francisco trying to pass, I guess, a local ordinance that would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in elections in San Francisco. Now, let's look at the pros and cons of allowing 18-year-olds, or I should say 16 and 17-year-olds, to vote in any election, whether it be local, state, and federal. But for now, we'll just limit it to local elections. Now, a lot of people will say that 16 and 17-year-olds are too immature to vote in any election. Well, they're not that much less mature than 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. Now, the second argument is that their brains aren't developed enough. Well, once again, how is the brain of a 16 and 17-year-old that much less developed than somebody who's 18, 19, and 20 years old? And then the third argument is laziness. Well, a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds are lazy, but a lot of adults are lazy. Think about how many people vote, not necessarily in presidential elections, but in local, state, and even congressional and U.S. Senate elections, who base their votes on television or radio commercials, whatever their conservative or liberal cable news network or talk radio show or source is, and those who vote straight party tickets. Or they make up their minds early on, months, maybe even years before the election, who they're going to vote for. Now, the pros of allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. Now, right now, we're talking about local elections, city, county, town elections. The internet and cable TV has provided so much information and does provide so much information. Now, social media has a lot of misinformation, but you can go on the internet, obviously. You can go to political party websites. You can go to candidates' websites and find out where they stand on the issues, and you can read as many news stories from different sources as you want to about the political candidates, the political parties, and the issues that are involved. Now, we know from studies that 16 and 17-year-olds who aren't old enough to vote are already politically active, and they participate in elections in higher percentages when they are allowed to vote than many adults. And they also get their parents involved in a lot of these elections. Now, of course, 16 and 17-year-olds are old enough to drive, they're old enough to work, and they're old enough to pay taxes. So you've got taxation without representation for people who are 16 and 17 years old. They're also old enough, 16 and 17-year-olds, to be tried as adults and sentenced as adults in criminal cases, particularly murder cases. Now, 16 and 17-year-olds, many of them are either juniors or seniors in high school, and their next steps are going to be going to college, joining the military, or going to work. So they definitely have a stake in issues like higher education, military policy, and how businesses are treated, how they're taxed, regulated, and that sort of thing. So I think from that standpoint, the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to 16 and 17-year-olds being allowed to vote. Now, this is a grassroots movement, and for now, it should stay at the local level. Progress, real progress, is not something that involves radical change. It involves incremental steps toward eventual wholesale change. And so I think that starting it at the local level, counties and cities, allowing 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds to vote is the right approach to take. You can extend that to the state level eventually with state legislative elections and gubernatorial elections, and a lot of states will require constitutional amendments to do that. And then finally, at the federal level, I would say by 2028, we should urge our members of Congress to approve a constitutional amendment and send it to the state legislatures for ratification to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in races for the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and the presidency. And so that's what I think. If you have a different opinion, or even if you agree with me, be sure and shoot me an email, a text message. You can find my contact information on LinkedIn, or you can just respond to this segment of Crowder's Corner. And before we end, I want to wish my father, Larry Crowder, a happy birthday. This is his 83rd birthday. September 16th, 1937 is the year he was born. And I want to take this opportunity to wish him a very, very happy birthday from a loving son. And that concludes this edition of Crowder's Corner here on LinkedIn. Have a good rest of your week, everyone. This is Mike Crowder. We'll do another show next week.